Good evening, and thank you for joining us to celebrate the induction of Clarence Major into the Georgia Writers Hall of Fame. I'm Toby Graham, University Librarian and Associate Provost at the University of Georgia. The university established the Georgia Writers Hall of Fame in 2000 to recognize the talent of our state's writers and to promote Georgia's literary legacy. I invite you to learn more about the more than 70 inductees, including Clarence Major, at GeorgiaWritersHallOfFame.org. UGA's Hargret Rare Book and Manuscript Library administers the Writers Hall, a library that holds the most extensive collection of works written by Georgians and about Georgia and the papers of many of our state's great literary figures. We rely on a distinguished panel of judges to determine which authors are inducted, and our judges include previous inductees, scholars, publishers, librarians, and readers from around our state. And we are grateful to our judges for the service that they provide. Our event tonight is held as a part of the University of Georgia's annual Spotlight on the Arts Festival, happening in person here in Athens and online throughout November. And now it's my privilege to introduce to you John Beckman, who will help us to induct Clarence Major into the Georgia Writers Hall of Fame. John Beckman is a professor of English at the U.S. Naval Academy. His writing has appeared in the Washington Post, Granta, Book, McSweeney's, and Arizona Quarterly, among other publications. His novel, The Winter Zoo, was named a New York Times notable book. John wrote the foreword for Clarence Major's forthcoming book, Dirty Bird Blues. John Beckman, on behalf of the University of Georgia Libraries, please accept our welcome and thanks for being with us, and the virtual podium is yours.
Thank you, Dr. Graham, for that kind introduction. The writer Philip Lee Williams was unable to make it tonight, and he wanted to be present to introduce his old friend and admired colleague, Clarence Major, but he has prepared some remarks for the event, which I am going to read now. So these are the words of Philip Lee Williams, not of myself, but I'm honored to be reading them. It is one of the greatest honors of my career to have a small part in the induction of this incredibly accomplished group into the Georgia Writers Hall of Fame. I extend a warm welcome to the friends and family of Pearl Clegg and Jericho Brown, and to the family and friends of the late U.S. Representative John Lewis, who was our hero and whom we will always miss. And I am frankly thrilled that I had the immense pleasure of inducting a great American writer and my friend, Clarence Major. Just listing Major's literary accomplishments in a career approaching 7 decades would probably take an hour or more. I first read his work half a century ago when I bought an anthology called Dices or Black Bones, Black Voices of the 70s at the University of Georgia bookstore. The book had come out in 1970, the year before I bought it, and I was immediately taken by his poetry. One poem, called Dismal Moment Passing, says in part, "Even summer coming 4 years ago now enlarges the green accuracy of nature, which we won't see till Mexico anyway. I think of my mother when I think of nature, her beliefs, those lies in space hanging there to arrange human minds like suffixes to structures, like societies, or meaning like a sheet flapping on a back porch. People might still wash things, hang them up to dry, like children playing roots or shock on the side, where we walk, upside down, looking at jets go, not easy like me here in this opaque opening, and promise to be all right tomorrow. Yes, yes." From that day forward, I looked for his work, bought it when I could, listened to a voice like none other I had ever heard. I later learned he was also a novelist, short story writer, and a highly accomplished and recognized visual artist. Clarence Major was born in Atlanta on December 31st, 1936, and he spent the first 7 years of his life in Georgia. But before moving with his mother and sister to Chicago, where he grew up. But his roots are deep in Georgia, and his mother was from Lexington in Oglethorpe County, just a few miles from this spot. By the time he was 14, Major was writing poetry and short stories and drawing and painting. He knew almost from the beginning that he was destined for a life in the arts, and Chicago offered him opportunities, About the same time, he attended a famous exhibit in Chicago of the work of Vincent van Gogh, and Clarence wrote this in retrospect. I was not sophisticated enough to know how to articulate for myself what these things were doing to me, but I knew I was profoundly moved. He studied at the Art Institute of Chicago during his teens. When he graduated from high school, he joined the Air Force in 1955. Among his postings was one in Valdosta, Georgia. When he finished his military duty, he returned to Chicago, from where he began to publish in little magazines and then his first books of poetry and fiction. He also started a literary magazine and began a lifelong effort to connect with the writers and artists of his own time. And he has kept a steady stream of prose, poetry, and painting for decades. He is the author of 10 novels, 2 collections of short stories, 15 volumes of poetry, and 10 books of nonfiction. He has also edited 4 anthologies, and he has had numerous solo shows of his artwork, as well as participating in a large number of group shows. After earning bachelor's, master's, and doctoral degrees, Major set out on an academic career that brought him in contact with students and writers from around the globe. He taught literature and/or creative writing at many colleges and universities, especially a long stint at the University of Colorado, which he left in 1989, and at the University of California, Davis, where he taught for 18 years before his retirement in 2007. Also, on a Fulbright Hayes Exchange Award, he taught American literature at the University of Nice in France from 1981 to 1983. He has won numerous awards in his long career. Major won a bronze medal as a finalist for the National Book Award in 1999 for Configurations, New and Selected Poems 1958 to 1998. He is the winner of a Pushcart Prize, and in 2002, he won the Stephen Henderson Poetry Award for Outstanding Achievement, presented by the African American Literature and Culture Society. As he once wrote, quote, "Despite the obstacles of race and class, I was always taught that I could accomplish anything I set my mind to. African American writers for me were a beacon, a guiding force. Through talent and hard work, he became that beacon, that guiding force for all of us." As one of today's other inductees, Jericho Brown, said of the book, The Essential Clarence Major, quote, "Clarence Major's attention to the details particular to Black life, his ability to capture the real-life surrealistic quality of these details, is only matched by his commitment to a kind of experimentation that expands and defies our ideas about the boundaries of genre. This isn't just a book of great literature. This is a book of history," end quote. It is with great joy that we present to you, as an inductee of the Georgia Writers Hall of Fame, Clarence Major.
Thank you, John. And many thanks to Phil, too, for those very kind words. I also thank Dr. Toby Graham for those generous opening remarks. And a special thanks goes to Leandra Nessel for coordinating these events. Many thanks also to Alfred Korn for nominating me. I thank the officials of the Georgia Writers Hall of Fame. I'm honored to accept this induction. I am also honored to see my name alongside so many fine writers I've long admired: Lillian Smith, Du Bois, Jean Toomer, Frank Yerby, John Oliver Killens, Flannery O'Connor, Alice Walker, Natasha Trethewey, Calder Willingham, Philip Lee Williams, James Dickey, Alfred Korn, Chiara Jones, James Allen McPherson, Kevin Young, Pearl Clegg, Tony Cade Bombari, Raymond Andrews, and Jericho Brown, and so many other fine writers. As Phil mentioned, I spent my first 7 years in Lexington. As the experts tell us, those first formative years are our most important. I have cherished memories of those times at my grandparents' farm and of the woods behind the farm, where I used to play as a small boy. My grandparents' home is still standing. I also think the Friendship Baptist Church is still there. In later years, when critics started calling me a big city writer, I thought, little do they know. Those first years are deep in my psyche, in large part shaping who I am. Again, thanks to everyone who made this induction possible. I'm grateful and honored. Thank you. I thought I would read a section from Dirty Bird Blues. John wrote the introduction, as was previously mentioned. It's a great introduction. I'm really, really proud of it and feel very honored that he participated. It's a Penguin Classic book, which is coming out in February, and we're both looking forward to it. And we hope that things will go well. It's a story about a man who's in love with his wife. It's also a story about a man who's in love with his music. So the two are having a little bit of difficulty getting along, let's put it that way. I'm going to read a section, just a brief section from it, to give you a sense of what the spirit of the book. So here goes. Cleopatra, she was 21 that summer, 1947. They got married 3 months later, October 8th, in the Greater Harvest Baptist Church at 57th and Indiana Avenue. Loved that woman as much as life itself. Her leaving him hit hard, though he tried to pretend it had no effect. But now he was trying to be sure about the things that led up to her going, why he hadn't seen the signs. He knew now he was just too blind, too stuck on himself, too much in his own desire, his music. Cleo, Cleo, what a woman. This was one of the reasons he loved her toughness and independence, though he wouldn't have put it in those words, loved her spirit. The woman's got spirit, standing there with those skinny arms just about up to her elbows in suds. So that's a kind of montage from a couple of sections in the book. The other thing that I think we're planning to do is John and I will talk a little bit about various literary things as well as this book, but generally on some other issues. So John?
Yeah. Shall we get started?
I think that's the next step, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Let's do it. My mind is still full of what you were just reading there. And of course, it just brought back so much of the novel to me as I was listening to it that I could just feel it moving off in lots of different directions.
I think that's what we talked about doing, having a discussion.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So I would like to begin by asking about something that I could just hear little cadences of. I think your readers can just begin to appreciate maybe the theme of this question here, but there's this wry sense of humor that threads its way throughout all of your writing, at least as I read it. And often it bursts into like comical joy, often into biting satire. In my Amputations, this is a book from the mid 80s, which is an extremely experimental and brilliant novel. The humor can be bitterly dark at times, but also just uproariously funny. And in Dirty Bird Blues, this is a book that we've been talking about. This is the first edition, the original edition that came out from Mercury House in 1996.
Wow. It looks pretty clean too.
Yeah, well, not if you look at this side of it and look into the pages of it, not at all.
It's
a well-worked book.
Care of it.
Yeah. But this book can be agonizingly painful. I mean, just really, really painful, but also laugh out loud funny. So even your paintings are humorous. And those of you who know the paintings of Clarence, they're vivid and they're colorful, but there are also just these kind of angular moments of comedy in them. So my question is, what does humor do for your art? And
Well,
what
I
do you think it does for any art?
Yeah, well, I think primarily I'm an optimistic person, and I think and I tend to have a natural tendency for irony.
Yeah.
And those two things lend themselves to humor. I tend to find the positive in any situation, even in the most tragic situations. There can be some element of humor. Maybe even just enough humor to get you through the tragedy or or the misfortune or whatever it happens to be.
Laughing to keep from crying, as Langston Hughes says.
The what?
Laughing to keep from crying, as I believe.
Right. I was trying to think of that. Yeah, that old expression. Yeah, but I think it's essentially it's just the optimism that I insist on in myself, and the and the irony is just natural. I didn't create it. I was born with it.
Yeah.
In the sense of irony, I think is also innate. So I would say that's the foundation for the humor.
Well, it makes perfect sense to me. I mean, having known you for decades, it's certainly your personality. So it flows very consistently into your art. So maybe it's very hard to distinguish in some ways between this irony that's so natural to you. Well, I have to ask a follow-up question though on that. Okay. How have you sustained your good humor? I mean, for so long. I mean, all throughout your life. I think there's evidence that it's just always been there, kind of consistently.
Yeah, well, if you're born with it, it's a sustaining thing. It sustains me. Nice. I don't sustain it. It sustains me. Yeah. So I think that's really the way it works.
Yeah, perfect. Well, you're very fortunate to have that sustaining you then, right? What better than humor?
I think so.
Yeah. So if we can go way back to the 70s and the 80s, especially when you were writing among the fiction collective and doing a lot of really adventuresome fiction and poetry during this period, and painting, of course, as well. But during that period, in books like My Amputations, but also, I don't know, Reflex and Bone Structure, and in Emergency Exit, but I think especially in My Amputations, you had a lot of fun confusing authorial identity with narrators and characters. That irony that you were just referring to really seemed to come at the level of character construction.
Right.
But then in the mid to late 80s and 90s, it seemed that there was a profound change in how you structured characters. They became less ironically constructed, more stable, both as narrators and characters. And so I'm just wondering what happened during that period that made this kind of profound change, right around 1988, if I could put 87, 88, if I could put a finger on it.
Well, I came to realize, John, that it was more fun to write self-apparent fiction than it was to read it.
Nice.
for me, I mean, that I tried to read. I read everybody. I read Barth. I read Bartholomew. I read everybody. And I also tried to teach. I was teaching a lot of those people back in the 70s and 80s. My students hated it.
Really?
Hated it.
It was so hip.
I was teaching Gertrude Stein and they hated it. They said, "Why do you torture us with this book?" So, but anyway, I came to realize that that I wasn't having as much fun with it, anymore. And I think that I'm just trying to think back why I moved to more conventional fiction. I think I had exhausted it I had exhausted the so-called experimental fiction. I think I had gone as far after Emergency Exit,
Yeah.
which is, I think that pushed
As far as the novel can probably go, conceivably, I would say.
I took it as far as it could go, and I just said, I can't go. There's nowhere else to go with this stuff, So I started working, but I lost a lot of readers, people who respected me for those things. Now they hate me for what I'm doing now. I don't know. But some of the people who followed me then are a little disappointed in what I'm doing now because it's more conventional, and they're still there with the experimental stuff.
Right.
A friend of mine, Zukanik, who was also an experimental writer, he asked me when that novel about Annie Eliza came out.
Such was the season?
Such as the season came out. He said, what happened? What happened?
Oh, no.
I said, I'm not writing experimental fiction anymore. And he said, well, goodbye.
Wow.
He said goodbye. It was a joke. It was a joke.
Sure. Right. Of course.
Still friends, but he was still, writing experimental fiction. And
okay, well, this wasn't
I had jumped ship.
Yeah.
So he thought, well, from his point of view, I had jumped ship when I published that book. It was quite a shock to him.
Yeah. Which I think is a triumph in its own right then, right? So you shocked with your experimental fiction, then you shocked by turning towards conventional fiction. But the thing is, you did it so beautifully. You did both of them, with such mastery that how can that not be admired? But it kind of raises this question for me. I know this isn't a prepared question. I hope you'll forgive me. You don't have to answer it. But okay. Did that suggest that maybe there was something almost Kabbalistic about the fiction collective and the experimental writing scene, that you really weren't supposed to go outside of its mysterious core?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that's absolutely true. Yeah.
Wow.
Sure.
Then you've
I would say that was the situation. It was I won't say it was as bad as some of these groups that where you join, you can't get out.
Right.
It wasn't that bad.
Yeah, right.
But
no deprogramming to get out of it.
Right. Brainwashing more.
Brainwashing, perhaps. Yeah.
No, it wasn't. We didn't go that far.
Right.
Right.
Oh, fabulous. Well, I'm glad I asked, but I guess this next question then is about what you turned to, like Such Was the Season. I have that here. And for those of you out there who don't know Such Was the Season, this is a great Georgia novel set in and around Atlanta and Spelman campus. And so if you want the real Georgia through Clarence Major, this was a great place to turn. But then also, almost simultaneously, you published this other novel that, well, go on, Clarence.
It was well received too. New York Times chose it as one of the better books of that year.
Yeah, for good reason. It's a beautiful novel. With Annie Eliza's voice is absolutely gorgeous. But also Painted Turtle, which came out, Painted Turtle Woman with Guitar, which takes place within a Hopi community, and is, again, just a thorough reinvention of everything you had been doing at the time. But I would say that this is also an experimental novel. It's about as much prose as verse as it is prose. And it trades just so elegantly between those two forms. But my question is, in both of these cases, whether it's Annie Eliza and Such Was the Season, and Baldi Sayataka, the narrator of Painted Bird, are just such distinctive, fully formed voices that just kind of seem to grow from their own roots. And so my question is, how do you plant those roots? How do you grow those roots? You seem to have just become a very different person in each of these books than maybe you were when you wrote My Amputations. Or
well, Annie Eliza came out of a very natural place, that voice I grew up hearing all my life, you know. That voice, I didn't have to practice it or think about it very much. It was there. I did a lot of research for the Painted Turtle book, but I think having lived in Colorado for so many years, I probably never would have written that book had I not lived in Colorado and visited New Mexico so often. I did go there quite a bit and got to know some people on the Zuni reservation.
Zuni, I'm sorry, the Zuni reservation, because Baldy is Hopi, right? And Painted Turtle
He's
is
part Hopi and part Navajo.
part Navajo, right?
Yeah. And they don't get along. They don't get along. The Zunis, the Navajos don't like, you know, they don't get along. Historical conflict there. But I did about 3 years of research on that book before I was able to, you know, totally absorb the research and not let it get in my way, you know, in writing the story. I actually started out with a giant African who was traveling with an early explorer. I forget the name of the explorer. And they went through Zuni, and the African stayed there. They were going exploring west, and the Africans stayed there and became part of the Zuni Empire. This was, I don't know, 14th, 15th century, and became a kind of, you know, God figure. That's what attracted me to the Zunis. I thought, wow, this big African, why is he there?
Yeah.
You know, and he was accepted among them, and became, you know, a leading figure with many wives and so on, and hundreds of children. It was
all of it well documented. This is
yeah. You can find his name in the books. It's a history. He's a historical figure. I'm just blanking on his name right now, but he's a well-known figure.
And with hundreds of children, he must still have a big presence within the Zuni.
Right, but he's not really remembered in the folk memory of the Zuni now. You know, I think he's been so absorbed into their culture that he's not there anymore. So I started off with him, but the more I wrote, the more I realized he had no place in the book. Because
he has no place in the book. He's not there.
Oh, no, he's not even mentioned in the book anywhere. But he's somehow way, way, way back behind the beginning of the book.
Yeah.
And I don't mention him in the book. He was in some early drafts, but I realized this was just, I was forcing it, and it wasn't really working. I actually started off with her voice.
And how she's found. I mean, her voice is in her songs. I mean, her voice is there, but it's very different from having Baldy's narrative voice.
Yeah, I started off with her voice as the narrator. And that didn't, you know, I realized I can't. Now I did Annie Eliza quite well, but I realized I wasn't really relating to her voice that well. And so I got into Baldy's voice, and I was so much more comfortable, you know, kind of looking at her in the second person, you know, and and it worked that way for me.
But you're doing these books almost simultaneously, it seems. I mean, I'm not. They were published almost simultaneously, but you were definitely in the first person for Annie Eliza. I mean, that book is her consciousness, right?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah. So just to exit reality altogether, often your fiction includes these dream sequences. I mean, I'm not sure if this is where you really started experimenting with it in your fiction, but Reflex and Bone Structure has significant dream sequences, and definitely Dirty Bird Blues. I keep wanting to show these covers here. Has these long italicized dreams, and so it seems that the dream world is very inspiring for you, but at the same time, surrealism, just like humor, just like your imagism, is threaded all throughout your writing, in your poetry, in your painting, definitely in your fiction. So I'm wondering, can you talk a little bit about that? What is
Sure,
the place
sure.
of dreams and of surrealism within the reality you're writing about?
Sure. I try to use dreams as a way to advance the story. I never use a real dream. I never copy dreams. I never use dreams that I have or that anybody else tells me about, but I make up dreams the way you'd make up anything, a poem or whatever. Excuse me, but it's, it works as a vehicle for moving the story forward. And that's what I try to do with the dream sequence. Same with surrealism. Like in Reflex and Bone Structure, and that's a very fragmented novel, but I use some surrealism and dreams. It's almost total dream and surrealism, just one after another, little vignettes.
Mm-hmm.
And it was reviewed in the New York Times, and I think maybe this reviewer said it best. He said, it's like jumping out of an airplane with a different view at every turn. And I thought, wow.
That's very accurate. That is definitely what
and I thought, wow, that really says it,
Mm-hmm.
It's like you can see this parachute going down and, you're turning around looking different. So that's what I was trying to do with that.
Well, if I can ask about something you just said, that it's clear that you're kind of writing these dreams, creating them ex nihilo. You're not copying someone else's dreams. They grow out of themselves, but they're so authentic. And the surrealism itself is so just kind of authentic. So is there a certain sensibility that you think is appropriate to dream consciousness, or
sensibility?
Yeah, is there a line of feeling or thought that you?
I think it probably comes out of the same place that poetry comes out of, And I remember in Dirty Bird Blues, near the end, there's that long dream sequence. You may remember that, where it's near the end of the book. Where
is this the one where he's going through the Sears, or pardon me, the Sears, right? And he arrives at the contract that he gets at the end. And he says,
I think that's it. Yeah, I'm not sure, but
I mean, there are a couple of dream sequences of dreams of lynching in that novel as well that are horribly memorable. Yeah,
quite a few. Yeah.
Yeah.
I was trying to find kind of a big way to bring that book to its conclusion. And then
you are talking about that last one.
Like it goes like doom, 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 doom. Then he ends up, he's just sitting on the side of the bed waiting for his wife to come home.
Yeah.
But there's that but there is also that surrealist nightmare where he thinks his wife is involved with the local preacher again.
Yeah.
And he's, drunk, of course.
And
he discovers that, she's not there, and they almost shoot him,
Oh, that roving night when he's just like consumed with anxiety.
That was surrealism.
That's surreal in itself. That reads like a dream sequence because, of course, yes, he is drunk, but even the concatenation of events is surreal. And it goes really deep.
And then he gets back home and he realizes that she's, up at his sister's house.
She's been there. She's just been living her life.
Well,
but not the life that he imagined that she was living.
Right. Yeah, he's an interesting character.
He sure is. Yeah.
I would say that's I don't think I think it just comes naturally to me, this whole sense of surrealism and dream sequences.
Yeah.
That just, somehow it's I feel the moment when I need to do it, you know, when it needs to be there.
Right.
And, you know, it may not work, and and that I'll realize pretty quickly and take it out.
Yeah.
You know, that's the process of writing, you know.
But I would say on the whole, most writers don't tend to have that off ramp into the dreamscape, you know, at the radio, and they just see the story is going to drift into a dream. And so I think that is wonderfully characteristic of your writing. I love your slang dictionary from Juba to Jive, which was published in what, 1995 or so. And I can see how the material history of language and slang just constantly flows through your poetry and your fiction. And I'm just wondering what moved you to compile those dictionaries? It must have been an extraordinary amount of work, because you also had your earlier slang dictionary, African-American slang dictionary from 69 or 70 or something like that. And that one's kind of hard to get your hands on. I mean, like literally, but the Juba to Jive is a more recent, maybe rendition of that one. What moved you to do that work?
Well, for both dictionaries, I think it started with the realization early in my 20s when I realized that I had grown up speaking a kind of English that was almost like the English that people from another culture speaks. You know, people who are speaking English as a second language. And I see this same kind of tendency in the writings of Bernard Malamud, who grew up hearing a lot of Yiddish, and Grace Paley, who grew up hearing Yiddish and speaking kind of a Russian version of Yiddish, because, you know, she was her parents, that's what they spoke at home. At school, she had to speak English, but there is this kind of English that has this shape to it that's different from television English, different from mainstream English, and scholars call it Black English. You know, so I knew, you know, I was interested in seeing if I could document something, and I realized, you know, I don't consider myself that kind of a scholar. I did it as a kind of book for everybody, not a scholarly book, although it did get some scholarly attention. The second one got some scholarly attention.
It's a very authoritative book, and it's very carefully done.
Yes, it was a selection of the Scholars Book Club, which surprised me, but it was.
I'd say by necessity it was, but yeah.
I was honored. Anyway, so that's why I wanted to see if I could document that language. I don't think I always feel like I don't fully succeed in setting out to do what I want. I don't, maybe that's part of what keeps me going, is that I don't fully ever succeed. You know, I always feel like there's more that I could have done, you know. And people who like the second book a lot will invariably ask me, when are you going to do another one? When are you going to do another one? I'm not going to ever do another one. I'm done with that. You know, I'm done with that. Yeah. I mean, I tried it. I tried to document the language. You know, it's not. I never pretended that it was a documentation of how African Americans speak, but it was, you know, it was supposed to be about words and phrases picked up from many different cultures right here in America, and you know, used by African Americans. Not all of it originating in the Black community. A lot of it originating on television, on the radio, in songs.
Would a lot of your research just be listening and looking and knowing what you already knew?
The only thing I claim is that these words and phrases are commonly used in the Black community. That's the only thing I claim. I don't claim that all of them originated there. And some people didn't understand that, but it's clearly stated in the introduction.
No, it is.
Yeah.
So while you were compiling Jupiter Jive from Jupiter Jive, and you were also putting together two major anthologies, Calling the Wind, which is the poetry anthology, right, in the Garden. I mean, the fiction, short fiction anthology of African-American short fiction, and
Right.
The Garden Thrives, which is your later anthology of African-American poetry. You were also writing Dirty Bird Blues, isn't that true?
Right,
When all
right,
these
it
happened
was.
at the same time.
I
So
was.
it clearly Manfred's character springs from all of your deep knowledge and interests and love of the blues and the blues culture. But so much of the slang documented in From Jupiter Jive is bluesman slang. I'm wondering, did his character arise from the lexical research as much as the musicological research? Did all things kind of flow into his character?
And they were done right back to back, you know. And the other thing too, I don't think I mentioned, I don't know if I mentioned, I probably mentioned this to you some years ago. While I was writing that book, you were living here at that time.
Mm-hmm, I was.
And yeah, and I was listening to the blues all the while I was writing that book, you know.
Yeah.
It was just every day I had to, you know, I don't know, you know, usually I need a quiet space to work, but not with that book. I had CDs on every day while I was working on it. And
blues of that precise era.
Get the rhythm of the language and the pacing of the, you know, the music. You know, people like John Lee Hooker and Mississippi Fred McDowell, Charlie Patton, all those people, you know. So I was listening to that, and Big Mabel Thornton. So they were all part of my creative process.
Well, and that can't be more evident on the page, because it's just, there's this extraordinary rhythm to that novel's voice that is almost equal parts prose, verse, and blues, and they're happening simultaneously. They're so of a piece. I mean, that is the language of that book. How did you light upon that? I mean, I can see that it comes from your listening and thinking, you know, through, you know, Manfred and the blues. But how did you work it out for, you know, back to, you know, that term of the 70s and 80s? How did you make that experimental leap onto the page?
You mean selecting that subject and the character?
Well, and that style, how you worked so smoothly into the style of the novel Dirty Bird Blues.
It comes out of this thing we were talking about just a little while ago, this language, you know. You mentioned that, you know, this cultural tendency, that's, you know, that's really innate, something that I grew up with, something that I grew up hearing.
Yeah.
And you know, big Jimmy Witherspoon, you know, people like that.
Yeah.
You know, and you know, I heard that all my life, you know. Yeah, so it comes from that, you know, that cultural experience.
So kind of like the voice of Annie Eliza came from the voices of your childhood. So did this come from
right?
A polyphony of voices from your childhood come into Manfred?
And like I said, you know, I don't think this is unique to African American culture. Like I used to work with Grace Paley at Sarah Lawrence, and she and I used to drive up to school together because I didn't have a car. We both lived in the village. And Grace would, you know, sometimes start speaking in that Yiddish accent that she grew up with. Yeah. And you know, I would listen to that and I thought, wow, you know, we have so much in common. You know, in a sense, you know, but she gets in the classroom and she speaks, you know, the King's language, you know, and, you know, very, very good proper American English. But she also, when she writes, which I think is a wise thing for her to have done, she writes in that voice that she knew as a child, as a little girl growing up, that voice that's shaped by the Yiddish ancestry that she, and culture, the voice that's shaped by that culture that she grew up with. And it served her well, and same with Malamud. I've been reading a lot of Malamud lately, his short stories, all the novels. I had read the novels when they first came out back in the 70s, but I've been rereading some of them in recent years. And because Malamud can be very depressing, but you have to, if you can get through the depression, you can get through, the suffering.
Yeah, but you earn a lot of beauty for having gotten through.
I love that. I love that cultural voice that is so shaped by the Yiddish and the way they turn the grammar, the construction of the sentence around. And start with the, and Grace does the same thing. She turns the whole structure of the sentence around,
So did you find that happening also? Because I was just been talking about diction, talking about the dictionary, right? But do you see that happening syntactically as well? Is that also part of how you?
I think so. Absolutely. In Dirty Bird Blues, absolutely.
Yeah.
But a good example of the way Malamud and Paley did it was to, a good example of it. I'm just trying to think of a good construction. You think now you're the king of the world,
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that's not perfect, but you get the gist of what I'm trying to say. That kind of humor that just permeates the language.
Right.
It just permeates the language.
And the constructions themselves become part of the humor, right?
Right. Absolutely.
Yeah. So you were also painting blues paintings when you were writing Dirty Bird Blues, weren't you?
I was doing a lot of painting at the time. Yes.
And I mean, you've always been, but I think that I recall that your paintings were kind of more themed towards that subject, or I'm not sure. Could you explain what the relationship, like that moment or any moment in your kind of writing and painting career, how those two
complement each other,
or forms kind of interpenetrate?
Yeah, I think the relationship between the poetry and the painting is more appropriate and more substantial, let's say, than the relationship between fiction and painting. I would say that there are ways in which the poetry and the painting work. You find elements in both that are definitely there.
Is it because they're both imagistic as opposed to
images, narrative,
symbolism?
Narrative can be less narrative in abstract work, of course. You can people find narrative even in abstract painting, because the painting is about what you see there.
People want to find narrative in it, right?
Sure, but certainly in representational work, normally you're going to find narrative, and just as you do in poetry, and certainly in fiction. But I would say the links between the poetry and the painting are more substantial. And I think for a long time they influenced each other, but lately, in recent years, I used to paint, one day and write one day, the next day.
I didn't know that. It was back and forth.
I don't do that anymore, though. I don't do that anymore. I concentrate on one thing when I'm writing. I'm not doing much painting. I might do some sketching.
Yeah.
but I don't do any heavy duty painting.
Right.
If I'm painting, I'm not doing much writing. I might,
Yeah.
write a poem or something, but I'm not going to, plunge into a novel, start
Right.
working on a novel. That's the big job, as you well know,
Yeah.
big,
You're in it.
exhausting job.
Yeah.
It can be.
Exactly.
It can be. You have to pace yourself, and you have to.
Depending on what else is going on in your lives, whatever your demands are, right?
Right. And we read about Hemingway writing in the cafes, just sitting there writing novels in the cafes in Paris. And you wonder, how could he do that?
Yeah,
Apparently he did it. He did it.
Well, he would romanticize that too, how he would just knock out however,
Right.
in the morning and then go hunt or fish or drink or do something, I can't mention.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah. So yeah, that's what I would say about the painting.
Are they associated with different places for you? Writing and maybe like a painting studio, writing spot? I mean, but speaking of Hemingway and his cafes.
Right. I've never been able to write in public.
Yeah.
I mean, I can sketch in public. I do that. I do a lot of sketching, and I've done a lot of sketching in public. Certainly not since COVID.
Yeah.
We don't going out to restaurants anymore. But I used to sit in restaurants. Pamela and I used to sit in the restaurant, and I would, if we were just having coffee or something, I would, make sketches of various people around without being too obvious.
Yeah, I'm sure. The surreptitious.
Sometimes make people nervous.
Mhm.
If they know you're sketching them. Or sometimes they are flattered.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah.
They want to come see it, they're you picked me out, right? Yeah, but I can see writing is it's a private act. It's an intimate act. Let's see. So can we talk about The Lurking Place?
Sure.
So Clarence has 2 novels coming out, Thunderclouds in the Forecast and The Lurking Place, and a collection of poetry this season, right? I mean, just
That's
like
right.
right now. And you have another poem coming out in the New Yorker. I mean, you couldn't be.
There's one out right now in the current issue.
Yeah, in this current issue, right. Which ours hasn't gotten there. I don't think ours is going. Well, maybe it's in the mailbox right now, but I'll have to go see. But The Lurking Place is a novel that takes place in New York City and Mexico in the late 1960s. It's a story of a young poet who is just, I won't spoil, what his fortunes may or may not be, but he's just kind of coming into his own voice, and he's really trying to find his place to do this. And the suspicion is that it comes close to events in your own life and the places you were at that point in your life and things that you were doing at that time in your life. So what for you is the relationship? Because we could probably say that about Such Was the Season, and we can say that about other elements of other novels and things. But what for you is the relationship between your lived life and fiction that might take place in and around those periods and places?
I may use something from real life, such as my own experience, but I always depend on the fiction to take me where it wants to go. Right. And I make a sharp turn away from real events or so-called facts. I was in Mexico in '68. I was, the bare facts are there, but the fiction took control, and you can't write a successful novel by sticking to, the events of real life. You have to let the fiction find its own direction. And same with Annie Eliza. I went to Atlanta, and that novel is based on a trip to Atlanta, but it's total fiction. It's right. Total fiction. None of that stuff happened.
So the events don't happen, but say we'll take it to Puerto Vallarta in The Lurking Place is such a vivid environment, and the characters are so vivid. Obviously, that's just your wonderful fictional creation. But what of your experience do you think is retained if it's not events? Because I really feel as if we're there, and in New York City, which is what a place to be, the Village in the late '60s, right? You
Well,
take
I was definitely trying to conjure up the mood and spirit of that late '60s,
Right.
by remembering things that were going on then, what people were reading, like Mao Zedong and stuff like
Yeah.
that. And, and then there was Che Guevara was big,
Right.
and all of those things, and
Abby Hoffman speaks lines of dialogue in
he's a
place.
character in the novel, and I knew him, but I created a fictional version of him,
Yeah.
Yeah, and I knew Jerry Rubin as
Yeah.
well, but I
Yeah,
don't use him literally. I created a fictional version of him, and same with all the characters as well as the narrator. I created, I don't think it would have succeeded had I tried to base the narrator on myself. I mean, I'm kind of way back behind him, guiding him,
yeah.
but I'm not really, it's like I'm the puppet master, and he's,
Right.
I'm, you get the picture of what I'm,
Yeah.
I'm the controlling what he's doing, but he's not me. I wasn't writing poetry in Mexico.
Yeah.
I wasn't writing my first book.
No.
All of that's fiction.
But
In fact, my first book it was already sold to Wesleyan. My first poetry book had already been sold to Wesleyan University Press at that time when I went to Mexico. But
so,
I wanted to create
going time than he did. He's really feeling the pressure over him when he's down in Mexico. But
right. I wanted to create this character who was way at the beginning of his career, not even sure he had a career or would ever have a career. All he had published a few poems in magazines, and that was about it. He was hopeful. His parents thought he was.
There's these questions of legitimacy kind of surrounding him, people asking him asking himself, right?
Right. And his parents thought he was crazy for not going back and working in the bank,
Yeah.
I mean, that he was really wasting his life.
Yeah.
But, he was following, as they say, following his bliss, following his dreams, which can sometimes bear fruit. Sometimes it can be disappointing, but, it's probably better to, to follow your dreams than not.
Oh, certainly. That's the risk worth taking. We won't say whether or not it pays off for him.
No, we won't give that away. No.
Readers will have to find that out for themselves.
Right.
I don't know if we're allowed more time for questions. It's 7 o'clock. I've got so much more I would love to talk with you about.
Well, we can talk during questions. We can continue to talk even if people have questions.
Right. Okay. Oh, yeah. Are there questions from the audience? Because the chat is live right now, and the Q&A. So questions can be asked through the Q&A function or through the chat function. I'm monitoring it here, and I know that Professor Major would love to answer your questions. So Clarence, what are you listening to right now? I mean, not obviously not listening, but what sort of music are you moved by right now?
I'm listening to a lot of classical music right now. Yeah,
You always have
all kinds of music. Yeah, but right now, classical music, especially when I'm working. you know, when I'm writing, I love to have classical music going.
Didn't you write a symphony in
Well,
high school?
usually what I like when I'm writing, I like quiet music, quiet, you know, guitars, violins.
Yeah, that's right.
You know, trying to think of. I have tons of it over here, right in arm's reach.
Yeah.
And yeah, so that's what I do. I listen, and it's very it's very relaxing.
Right. So we have a question here from Nancy Hartness. How do you feel that your early Georgia upbringing continues to influence your world and your work?
As I said in the acceptance speech, you know, our first years are always, the experts tell us that our first years are our most important years because that's when we are shaped as people. Apparently, we're born with our personalities, apparently. And the first 5 or 6 years certainly determine a lot about demeanor, about personality, about it's the beginning of the environmental effect on who you are. So yeah, I think having access to my grandparents' farm and the big wilderness behind the farm, the fact that they grew apples, they had animals, they had orchards, they had gardens, they were self-sufficient in many ways. I think my grandmother had to buy salt, and I'm not even sure she probably could make salt. She was so efficient at everything, but she certainly knew how to make soap. I know we had chickens. We had chickens. We had pigs. They had a cow, a milk cow. They had. So I kind of grew up with that. I think that was an influence on, and I think a lot of that helped me understand the environmental, at least the mental shape of Annie Eliza's thinking and her voice, you know. But I think that the rules, also I was in Atlanta, which is a very cosmopolitan city. So I had both. I had both the country and the city, you know, almost equally, because I was born in Atlanta and I spent more time in Atlanta than I did at my grandparents' farm. But I think it was, yeah, I think it was very, very useful for me to have had access to both the city and the country. Because
So grandparents had orchards. Did they have peaches?
they had peach trees, they had fig trees, they had pecans. Yeah, they had a lot. They had a lot. Yeah. So I don't know if that answers her question, but
I can't tell from her question, but it does to me. So we have another question from Dr. Toby Graham, our introducer, and it's very much a librarian's question here. He asks, you placed a large collection of your papers at Minnesota, and did you retain many unpublished or partially complete works that you've considered revisiting? So I guess maybe it means things that you maybe held back from the archives to keep.
That I held back from the archives. I did for a while. I had a novel. I had a couple of novels. Every writer I've ever heard of has an unsuccessful novel somewhere, or maybe more than one. But you keep hoping that you can revisit it and find some new life in it. I finally gave up on an unsuccessful novel. Well, one unsuccessful novel, and I sent it to the archives. So it's there. it's too depressing to talk about because you just don't want to revisit that, but it
Now
was
it's hard to be discovered by a scholar who will publish it for you, right?
I hope not, but they do that they did it with Hemingway's stuff, which is some pretty awful stuff that they keep publishing.
Yeah.
Like that long novel he wrote, what was it? I don't remember the title, but some of that stuff that.
Well, the Garden of Eden was a big success. So the editing of that was controversial.
Of that Summer, I know Summer was in the title.
Yeah.
But anyway, yeah, I think it's unfortunate that some of that stuff gets published after writers pass on. They just brought out John Oliver Killen's, one of his novels that was never published during his life. I am reading a novel right now called Savage Coast by Muriel Rukaiser that she wrote during her trip to Spain in 1936, where she was reporting on the alternative Olympics. There was an alternative Olympics protesting the Nazi Olympics in Germany. So they had one in Spain in opposition to the Nazi Olympics. She went there to report on that. And this novel is fascinating.
I bet.
Now, I usually think novels published after a writer passes usually aren't that good, but this one is one of the best I've ever read.
Wow. So when was it issued?
It was published, I don't know, 2-3 years ago by the Feminist Press.
Feminist Press. Wow.
At City College in New York City.
But she's a fabulous poet.
Fabulous poet. But she worked for many years as a reporter. She was she reported on the Scottsboro Boys.
Oh, I didn't know that.
And got arrested for doing, for when she was down reporting on that situation. So she went around. She was a tough cookie, man. She went to some tough places. And this book deals with the beginning of the Spanish Revolution. Civil War. I'm sorry.
Was going to Spain in the 30s. Yeah.
It begins with it deals with the beginning of the Spanish Civil War. All of these people walking around with guns, and the train she's on gets stopped, and people are without food, without water. All of these, they're nationals. There's a German, there are several people from America, a couple of French people. These are foreigners going to this alternative Olympics. Wow. And they get stopped on this train. And most of the book is about what happens in their effort to get there. It's amazing.
No, I'm sold. I have to read it. And I'm sorry that I missed it. By the way, Nancy Hartness has said in the chat, thank you for your beautiful answer. We live in Athens, Georgia, and Lexington is still a place where a young man could happily grow up, she says.
Well, thank you.
Thank you, Nancy.
Any other questions?
There are no more questions in the chat. As much as I was going to ask you about all of your voracious reading and the relationship of that to your writing, you did give us this wonderful answer about Muriel Rukaiser. I've got to go see her latest book, but her unpublished posthumous book. But thank you so much, Clarence. This has just been an absolute delight. Congratulations on your induction to the Hall of Fame. I'm so honored to have been part of this conversation and part of your induction, obviously.
Well, thank you so much, John. It's so great to see you again, too.
You look fabulous. Yeah, how about that? Isn't that great? Well, right. I want to see you face to face in Yolo County, too.
And maybe when our book come out in February, it's coming out in February, maybe we can do a little promotion again.
That'd be fabulous. Let's do that. I would love to do that. Let's do that. We'll find a way to make that happen.
Okay.
Wonderful. And I'll just chime back in one more time just to say, you know, Clarence, congratulations on your induction into the Georgia Writers Hall of Fame. We are delighted to celebrate your life and your work at the University of Georgia as a part of the Writers Hall. It's been enlightening and an enjoyable experience tonight to hear you talk about your writing, including some of the creative origins of your work, and even to close with some of the things that you're reading. Really a gift to all who are able to listen in. And to John Beckman, your wonderful, insightful questions driven by your engagement with Clarence's work. Your admiration of it is, very clear, and it really helped to make this this event special. So thank you so much. So to everyone else, please come back online Tuesday night, November 16th at 6, when we'll induct the wonderful Pearl Clegg into the Georgia Writers Hall. So for more information on that, please check the library's website for details at libslives.uga.edu. So again, thank you. Congratulations, Clarence, and good night, everyone.
Thank you, Toby.
All right. Thank you, Toby. Thank you, Landra.